In order to make ventilated brake discs available to Pakistanis, they used scrap steel bodies to melt and cast. After simple processing on their lathes, they could create cost-effective double-layer brake discs. In order to reduce the cost of the entire production, our small workshop chose these scrap steel bodies. The price they received was not only very affordable, but also very good at disposing of these waste products. In order to facilitate heating and melting them into molten iron, we first had to knock them into small and medium-sized pieces. After weighing the iron blocks from each mine, they were transported to the furnace charging port through their elevator to prevent the scrap iron from being loaded too much and affecting its lifting capacity. After the master completely filled the furnace, he had to wait for 3 hours of heating for the iron blocks to completely melt into the required molten iron. While heating, Fu also needed to use the yarn to create the sand core synchronously because the brake disc this time was ventilated. When hollowing out, the sand core was needed to stand in position to prevent the molten iron from filling the entire mold. After the embedded sand core was simply made, the molten iron could be poured out to create the appearance of the sand out disc. The master will fill the sand box with the mixed sand and then compact it manually to avoid the existence of empty valleys inside the sand and reduce the probability of residual products. After the master quickly makes the mold cover, a sand box of the same size is needed to replicate the bottom of the brake disc in one step. This layer design is used to facilitate the removal of the brake disc in the internal position. At this time, the molded mold does not meet the requirements of the glue column. The temperature of the molten iron glue column will produce gas. As for each upper cover, it must be pierced with a breathable fire to avoid glue columns, which will also cause the mold to be cracked. At this time, the mold has no hardness, so the master will use a flammethrower to heat it. In this way, it can be cured through the high-temperature mold. After all the steps of mold making are completed, then these sand cores that are also hardened at high temperature will be placed in the center of the upper and lower molds. The remaining gap is the space for the molten iron to be glued. After confirming that it is correct, use an iron block to press the mold tightly to prevent the molten iron from overflowing from the gap. At this time, the scrap iron block that has been continuously heated has successfully melted into boiling molten iron to facilitate the gluing of the mold. Masters will use small glue barrels for packaging, which can improve the efficiency of glue and prevent the waste of materials caused by too much molten iron. You can demold directly after waiting for cooling to avoid the internal sand from completely hardening. The molded brake disc needs to be cooled overnight. After cleaning the surface sand, the surface of the turning yarn glue column is very rough. In order not to affect the braking effect of the brake pad, the surface layer needs to be removed by lathe cutting to ensure that it is flat and smooth. After the side and front sides are processed, the brake calipers are all double pistons. The surface also needs to be carefully cut, although this will make the thickness of the brake disc thinner. Sufficient processing space has been reserved in the early stage. Then, the surface of the brake disc is punched by a bench drill with a mold with a standard hole spacing. The tap slurry hole position is used for processing. It is convenient to fix the wheel rail with bolts. After the master expands the hole with a large drill bit, in order to prevent the brake disc from rusting, a layer of anti-rust paint should be sprayed on the surface. If the part other than the contact surface of the brake pad is sprayed, the master will spray the paint skillfully and quickly. These brake discs need to be cut twice because they cannot be processed in a detailed layer. In order to improve the overall aesthetics, the paint on the contact surface of the wheel needs to be cut and removed. The paint spraying effect is in the best state. After the master cuts a thin layer on the surface, the brake disc glued by the melted scrap iron has been produced. What do you think of the quality of such a brake disc?